hear what's going on in state parks and cultural resources.
Thank you, Co-Chairman Miller and Co-Chairman Driscoll and Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources Committee. Darren Westby, Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. Like to thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. Joining me on the Zoom call, I have my two deputy directors of the park side of the house, Nick Nalen and Dave Glenn. And I also invited our manager of the Outdoor Recreation Office, Chris Floyd, to join us today for a latter part of our discussion this afternoon. Mr. Co-Chair, if I could, I'd like to give you a quick update of the season and then turn it over to Chris, our OR manager, to discuss the items regarding that funding. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. The State Museum and State Archives, I know I've briefed you guys a little bit on this. They were closed for a while, and obviously during COVID, nobody was coming in. And so they shifted really quick to an online type of business model. They are open right now, but they really shifted to try to ensure that we're being successful. The online assistance on genealogy has just gone through the roof. I think people have been sitting at home a little bit and thinking about their genealogy. And so they've been seeing a lot of calls on research of that. The other one that I think is really impressive is the Skype in the classroom. Whereas before we would get a class that would come in and take a tour, come in on a bus, take a tour. So we'd get 30, 40 kids at a time on that bus tour. Now we're getting thousands at a time. So we're going global with our introduction to Wyoming history, which is pretty impressive. And that group down there just really killing it in how to get the word of Wyoming and its history out there. I also want to remind all of you that the State Museum and the State Archives has been working with the Heritage Center and the Humanities Council to be that COVID-19 repository. If you remember, well, obviously none of you can remember the Spanish flu, but there's really very little history to go back to in Wyoming during that pandemic. And so they took it upon themselves to be that repository. So future generations, if they want to research what happened, remind you all that any artifacts that's COVID related, any documents that you might generate because of COVID-19, please send them into the State Museum and State Archives so that we can capture that properly. The Wyoming Arts Council and the Cultural Trust Fund have been just trying their hardest to get grants and funding out to the artists that are really struggling right now, as well as all the other cultural organizations that have either had to shut down or really limit their operations due to COVID. The Wyoming Arts Council did receive a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts through the CARES funding for a little over $400,000, and they've gotten all that distributed, and I think it's been very well received in the artist community. Now I'd like to switch gears over to the other side of the house, which is on the park side. And I know I've talked to you a little bit earlier about what happened earlier on in the pandemic in that March, April, May timeframe. We did have to close our historic sites during that early season. And with the closures early, as well as just, I think, consumer sentiment led the historic sites being down right now about 20 to 30%, depending on the site. The parks are a different story. As you recall, we had to close camping early so we could get a developed plan. The plan was approved and we were able to get camping open safely. We went from to 100% reservable, also went Wyoming residents only for a little while, and then opened it up once the surrounding states finally decided to open up camping to within their borders. We have had an extremely full summer. At the end of August, our visitation has been up 1 million more visitors compared to 2019. Boise, there in the center of the state, is up 270%. That's 224,000 more people at Boise State Park. Kurt Gowdy's up 247%. That's up 330,000 more people. Seminole, 126%. Sings Canyon is up 110%. So I think just those numbers alone are telling you that we've had an extremely busy summer, and we're very proud to have been able to support those visitors that have come through our system. Fortunately for us all, but unfortunately probably for staff that are just completely burnt out at this point, we still have 4 months left in this year. Within that last 4 months, we normally see about 1 million more people. With our projections, we're probably going to see 1.3, 1.4 million, which could potentially bring our 2020 visitation around the 5.6, 5.7 million visitors, where normally last year, which was a record year, we were at 4.3. So, like I said, we're extremely blessed to have this product to offer during this time, and very blessed to have the staff that we had this summer. On the revenue picture, just got a few estimates that came in that our revenues are tracking along with our visitation, which shouldn't shock anybody, but with our annual passes, they probably don't track dollar for dollar or dollar for visitation. Initial reports are showing that right now we're up about $1.5 million more dollars this year than we did in 2019. Mr. Chairman, with this increase in visitation, obviously there's some great opportunities with all these new people coming in, but they also give us a little bit of challenge as well. Most of the new people may or may not know anything about our rules or regulations. They also may or may not know anything about outdoor recreation and etiquette of outdoor recreation. And so we've been really working hard to continue our messaging around safe and being responsible, really working on the messaging of help you keep them open by following the guidelines and the rules and following our requirements of outdoor recreation etiquette. The opportunities, which are pretty obvious to us, if we did even half as good a job as we did this year, we're expecting to get at least 75% of them back next year, which will just continue our rise of expanding our product offerings to our visitors. One of the major issues we did have this summer, we were not able to hire as many seasonal employees as we'd like, and we kind of are. We always have troubles finding people to come work. We offer hourly wage to our seasonals anywhere from $9 to $14 an hour. However, this summer, with the unemployment payments that were being placed out there, we had a really hard time filling our seasonal positions due to the fact that they could capture that unemployment stimulus without being employed. So with that, just for an example, Glendo, I believe, had one seasonal the entire summer. That's a big part to only have one seasonal. And so everybody in that district really stepped up to go help Glendo and Guernsey to make sure that our consumers had a good experience. Everybody really had to step up. So again, my hat's off to all of our staff that have worked just completely hard and they've worked their tails off to have a high level of brand management that our agency exudes. So, again, as we talked at our last meeting and was suggested at our last meeting that we look at our fees and I just want to notify you that we're in the first steps of going through the rule changing process. We will be marketing it, and we will be hopefully going out to the public for review and comment. And our hopes is to have this all wrapped up by the end of the year so it can be implemented for the 2021 session or season. Shifting just slightly to the outdoor rec world. I'm sure if you've tried to buy an RV or an ORV or a watercraft or a bike or any outdoor recreation equipment, those sales have just gone through the roof, and retailers throughout the season have been having a hard time just keeping inventory available. And that's a nationwide issue, not just the state of Wyoming issue. We've had the opportunity, as we've always known it, and it's been supported through the Outdoor Rec Task Force reported recommendations, but it's become really clear to us that parks and outdoor recreation has a significant that significant growth potential to help try to be part of that state's economic solution as well. And so the team, along with some of my other executive branch agencies, really trying to double down on our efforts to see where we can ensure that we have that leadership in the outdoor rec industry to elevate our revenue generation for the state of Wyoming. If you remember, there was an Outdoor Industry Association economic impact report that was developed in 2017. I think it hit the street on 2018, but it showed Wyoming had an economic impact for the outdoor rec industry at 5.6 billion. And what we're trying to get our heads wrapped around is what is it going to take to push that impact from 5.6 to 10 billion? What is it going to take for all of our agencies and the public sector and private sector to take it upon themselves to see what it's going to take to elevate us to that? And so just for instance, at the 5.6 billion outdoor impact, the state and local taxes are just a little over $500 million. If you just crosswalk that over, if everything remains equal at 10 billion, it could be 800 million. So that 300 million increase with the economic impact could really mean a lot to our state and at least in all of the communities in which we serve. And so, Mr. Co-Chairman, I know we want to stay on track, and that was a really quick high-level update, but I would sure stand for any questions. And if not, I'll turn it over to Chris Floyd to start working on discussing with you our list of potential fundings for that office.
Thank you, Director Westby. Questions, Director? Just go ahead and, okay, Representative Flitner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director Westby. When you guys are kicking around these ideas, do you give any thought to the impact of what, if we reap what we sow here, if we get the kind of numbers that you're looking at with recreation, have you looked at the impact on our communities, wildlife? I live at the base of the Bighorns, as does Representative Tass, and I think many of the people on the committee are well aware of the impact of having additional people in the state and what they've done, especially this summer. And I know that there's been some detrimental impacts around in Park County, around Hart Mountain. And so I just wonder if you all, when you make these projections, if you give that kind of thought, and in so doing, is there any way to pencil out what those costs might be to the state in the long run? The impacts on our highways, people pushing into more and more public spaces and more private spaces. I've been to Oregon near Bend, and I've seen what kind of recreation, what those numbers look like. And it looks like ants on an anthill in places. And I don't know that that's what I really hope for Wyoming. I mean, I understand the opportunity in terms of revenue, but I'm just wondering about the opportunity cost. Thank you, Director Westby. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flitner, that's a great question, and that's exactly why this Office Outdoor Recreation is created. The intention is to go out into, up in your neck of the woods. We did the Bighorn Basin Outdoor Rec Collaborative, and the intention was to get that everybody to the table and around a table to really start to focus on exactly what you just pointed on. How do we sustainably design growth to ensure that exactly what you are concerned about isn't happening, and which kind of is what happening this year, because we're not out in front of it the way we would like to be. And that's why I want to double down our efforts with the Office of Outdoor Recreation, with the state of Wyoming, so we can ensure that we are directing some of those traffic to areas that we know are underloved and away from those that are overloved. And that's why I'm pulling together, we've been talking for a long time, but really want to double down the executive branch's efforts on ensuring those collaboratives are taking place at a faster rate, trying to get out in front of this statewide. and then really focus on how do we direct people through the state where we want them to recreate. And obviously we're needing and wanting to pull in all the private sector as well to ensure that we're not just inundating all the public lands. There's plenty of private lands that may want to receive some of this revenue from recreating as well. And how do we help them become part of that solution and help generate some business for them as well? So it's a big issue that we are for sure, they're coming. Whether we think we want them or whether we know we want them, they're coming. And I think it's prudent upon our agency, the Office of Outdoor Recreation, as well as the other executive branch agencies, the federal agencies, as well as the local communities, that we all jump on board to try to get out in front of this to help guide and sustainably design how and what we want this roadmap to look like. We are also, Representative Flintner, talking with Director Reiner over at the Department of Transportation to ensure that the Bicycle and Pedestrian Task Force is being included in this as well, which also brings in the STIP, which then we can start talking a little bit broader about what is the road impact, what is the travel impact as well. So it's a very broad conversation, but we do recognize that it's more than just a trail out in the middle of nowhere. There's a lot of impact all the way through, both positive and potentially negative, and we want to make sure that we address that as we go. But that's a great question. I really appreciate you asking it.
Director Westby, there was a news article a few days ago about a lot of waste and garbage at a lot of sites around Wyoming. I think they were referring mostly to federal sites, but did you have that same issue at its parks?
Mr. Co-Chairman, that's a great question. You know, we didn't necessarily see at our state park side of the house, we did not necessarily see people leaving a bunch of trash behind in their campsites. Now, we do have trash bins that were completely full at the end of every weekend. So you bring it in, pack it out, is still an etiquette thing that we're trying to work with our consumers. But we had the luxury of being 100% reservable, whether you like it or not, or whether it was well received or not. We had everybody's names and contact information. So if you left a campsite in disarray on one of our sites, we had your name and number. We can call you up and ask you to come back and clean it up, or send them a citation for littering. And so those had the options for us. Now, we do feel and are in a lot of conversation with our federal partners that have seen that same kind of influx. And yes, they did see some of those issues, but I'll take you back to that challenges and opportunities. You know, the opportunities, we got a whole bunch of free customers that we didn't really, we didn't have to market very heavily to get here because of this COVID. But the challenges are that they don't know our rules, they don't know our regs, they don't know the etiquette of leave no trace or tread lightly. And so we're just constantly in a battle of trying to educate our consumers in hopes that they understand multiple things, not only just the national etiquette of outdoor recreation, but the state of Wyoming's etiquette, that you come here and you leave it better than you found it mentality. And so we're going to continue that messaging and in hopes that we can, again, as I mentioned to Representative Flintner, hopefully we can get out in front of this and really bolster our education component as well.
Great, thank you. Representative Haley, do you have a comment?
Kind of a comment and a question for the director, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I'd like to reiterate what Representative Flintner said about the increased traffic, and compounded here is the fact that Centennial is an unincorporated town, so we have no local law enforcement. We have to depend on the sheriff's office and the patrol, which they come up occasionally. But with the increase in traffic, it was horrendous this summer. And I hope somebody considers that in promoting the state, which leads to, I asked Director Westby last time about the dump stations like at the Territorial Prison Park that are voluntary. I would ask that you would, in your upcoming meetings, look at what it would take to install a system that they had to pay before they could dump, because it was overwhelming to watch those. There was a line constantly at the territorial prison, and I look at the people that avoid parking in the snowmobile parking area up here where it's only $5, so they don't have to pay, and they've got these, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of recreational vehicles that they're using, and they also don't buy the stickers, which also brings up the other point that I wanted to ask you about is there is no differential in the price for a resident versus non-resident snowmobile sticker. And we're inundated with snowmobiles up here, which is okay, but the non-residents ought to be paying just like the non-resident hunter and fishermen do to use our resource up here. And you guys are the direct beneficiaries from that money that's collected. And I'd like to know if that is going to be part of your discussions in their upcoming meetings. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haley, all good points. I know the dump station conversation's been had for years now in our agency of can we charge, do we charge enough, do we make it mandatory, do we make it optional? Dump stations are horribly expensive to operate. We had one up at Kurt Gowdy, and it finally got to the point where we just could not operate it anymore. And being that close to the reservoir, the Board of Public Utilities out of the city of Cheyenne would not allow us to replenish the sewer system that we had there. So we had to take it offline. The ones that are still operational are in a city complex and have a significant sewer system, not just a septic leach type of system. And so they're horribly expensive. And we are internally continuing to talk about trying to increase or mandate or ensure the opportunity of charging those fees. Per the deferential treatment of snowmobiles, I would probably have to reach back to Dave or Chris or Nick to talk a little bit about that and the why on that. I know from the revenue perspective that comes back to having the ability to not necessarily fill our coffers so we can do things. It's to generate the trails contracts, be able to get the grooming out there and be able to pay for parking areas and do the capital construction side of the house. So Nick or Dave, do you have any comments regarding the non-resident snowmobile permits?
Go ahead.
Dave, you're not hearing you. Okay, well, while he's going, I guess, Representative, I'll just put it on my list to follow up with. And once I have some reasoning, I can get it back out to this committee if that's amenable.
That's fine with some further follow-up on those questions. Unless Dave or Nick has some answers right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you, Dave.
Thank you. My apologies. Mr. Chairman, I would just throw out regarding the snowmobile trails, by statute, that money has to go right back into building more trails and maintaining those trails. We haven't had the need to increase those fees since they were increased a few years ago when the snowmobile associations came out and rallied to increase those fees to build more trail and maintain more trail. So we're building and maintaining what we have right now within the budget we have.
Dave, could you double those fees for out-of-staters without any legislative action?
My apologies. Can you ask that question again?
Could you charge more for the out-of-state snowmobilers?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we would need legislation to do that. Because it is in
Okay.
statute that we charge a certain amount.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman,
very good. Thank you. Representative Flitner.
thank you. I'm curious, Dave, do we know how many snowmobile trails are actually on state lands versus federal lands?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flitner, the majority by far probably, and don't hold me to these numbers, but I would say 95 to 98% are on federal lands, mostly Forest Service lands. They cross a few state pieces and that's it.
Okay. Okay, further questions for Director Westby?
Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Freeman.
with our agreements with the feds to develop their soils, is there any kind of restriction to where that we charge everybody the same amount of money for their permits for stuff?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Freeman, to the best of my knowledge, no, that is not an issue. No, it's not an issue.
Okay. Okay, further questions? Okay, Director, go ahead or continue with your presentation or.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative James, Senator James.
I'm sorry, I may have missed this. What'd you say the cost was yearly to maintain those snowmobile trails?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I don't have that directly in front of me. I can get that to you.
Okay, and I was just wondering because you have, I was poking around and I saw that you have currently, well, at least around December of 18, there's about $3.5 million you guys have collected in your snowmobile gas tax. And so I was just curious on what you guys currently have in that account from your snowmobile gas tax, and if it's taken more than $3.5 million to maintain those snowmobile trails. So, yeah.
Two different things.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, we can put together the billing on that, the amount of revenue we collect versus the amount of contracts that we have in the operations of the trails, both snow and ORV, and we can get that back out to you. I do know that the Trails Council has elected to try to carve off, not necessarily on the gas tax, but on the fees from the registrations, some money off of that doesn't go directly to a contract to ensure that their long-term goal is to purchase the building that they are currently leasing up in just outside of Lander, and that you will possibly be seeing some kind of legislation to authorize us to do that. And so they've been trying to, for the last probably 10 years, save up enough money to try to purchase that building. And so if you see, not necessarily again on the gas tax side, but on the registration side, if you see a stored amount of money in that account, that's for the reasoning in which they were trying to accomplish that through the Trails Council.
Okay, Representative Haley.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I think we're sure leaving a lot of money on the table. Maybe it would take legislation to be able to increase those fees and divert some money while keeping enough to maintain the trails. But these snowmobilers are coming up here in droves and we're just missing out. Given the state's financial crisis, I think we're leaving a lot of money on the table by not addressing that source of additional revenue. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Further comment, committee.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Linney. Go ahead,
Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question and a comment for Darren. First is a comment. most of the citizens of the state of Wyoming contribute to the economy of the state of Wyoming and take pride in the facilities we have throughout the state. And especially in Representative Haley's area up around Centennial, where we have an influx of out-of-staters, either from the east or from the south, that have total lack of respect for the communities that they come into. So I would be in total support of trying to at least increase the fees on out-of-staters, no matter what they use. Then my question would be the occupancy rate of state parks in this last year. How many, or do you even track whether they were in state or out of state? If you have any idea what that might be.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moniz, we do track where the permit sales are from. We do track what our visitation is tracking. Obviously, this year we're going to see a significant non-resident usage with at least on the park side of the house. The first month and a half, it was the camping was all Wyoming residents, but the use during the day use was probably a very high percentage of non-resident. And so, but we have a pretty good percentage at this point. What we can put together as a kind of an end of the season report, if you'd like, on visitation, as well as ORV and snowmobile ticket sale or registration sales, if that'd be okay.
I think that's fine, Darren. I think you're hearing pretty loud and clear from the colleagues here in the state of Wyoming that they're frustrated a little bit with the impact on our communities without reaping some sort of a reward. So I think it'd be worth your while to look at increasing those out-of-state fees on whatever the use might be.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Moniz, I'm hearing it loud and clear for sure. I hope also that we all keep in mind as well that we're hoping that these people that are coming from out of state, and I'm a prime candidate. I spend a lot of my time at Glendo, and I do see a lot of green plates, but I also know that those green plates that are coming up into Glendale State Park are spending a lot of money when they're coming to that community. And so I'm hoping that we keep in mind the impact that these people that are coming to the state, what they're doing and leaving behind when they're leaving the state as well. And so, but I 100% agree that we're doing on the park side of the house, the entry fees and the annual passes, we're increasing those. You guys, just giving you a heads up, the annual passes and all of our fee structure, this body set caps on all of our fees a 3 years ago. This last round of fee increases that we're doing on the park side of the house, state park side of the house, we took all of the out-of-state fees and took them to the cap, and then worked below that for the resident. And so just so you know, we heard you loud and clear. On the parks fee side of the house, we're definitely doing that. We will start and take a look at the snowmobile and the ORV fees as well to hear you loud and clear.
Director Westby, on the fees, is that a legislative cap, or where's the cap from?
Mr. Chairman, on the state park fees, those are legislatively capped within our 36.4.121 section.
So we need legislation to remove caps on out-of-state fees, or is there an antitrust or any ruling that would be opposed to that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not too sure about antitrust. I know that with our funding that we receive through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we are mandated that we cannot charge more than twice what we charge an in-state for the state park system, because we utilize the Land and Water Conservation money in the state park system. So we are mandated that we can only charge twice a non-resident, or twice a resident fee for a non-resident. So if you want, you could sure go back into legislation and remove those caps. I guess the one thing that we as a state park system have enjoyed over the last 3 or 4 years is being able to operate by rule underneath those caps, to be more dynamic in our pricing, to make sure that we are more nimble, depending upon what's happening within our system, rather than having to come back to the legislature every time we wanted to increase a state park entry fee by $1. And so I appreciated the caps and being able to operate by rule underneath those caps. And so if you want to eliminate it, I'm not going to complain, just so long as I don't, just so long as I have the ability to operate by rule to increase those fees where we feel is fit to get through. But the other option would be to go in and increase those caps so we have a little bit more elasticity to move and bump up into for the non-resident.
What's the reason for no more than double? Again, can you repeat what agency, what federal entity is charged at? And is that by federal statute or is that by rule?
That is the National Park Service. I'm sorry, it is National Park Service, right, Dave? Yeah, National Park Service. We operate the Land and Water Conservation Fund for the state side through the National Park Service. And so monies that are collected, taxes that are collected off of the offshore drilling in the Gulf come into the National Park Service and get distributed through all 50 states for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We've historically, in the last probably 5 to 10 years, have been in the $900,000 a year rate that we grant out throughout the rest of the state. This year, through the funding change that have happened within that grant stream, we're looking to a little over double that for this year, and we see that remaining similar. And so that funding stream for the state of Wyoming is pretty significant for our local communities and governmental entities that get to use that to improve the recreation system throughout the rest of the state.
So if we were to exceed the double of the in-state rate, we would lose that money?
Mr. Chairman, we would be in violation of that, and we would be in limbo of whether or not we get to maintain keeping those funds and granting them out. Yes.
Have they ever denied any state any of those funds as they charge that for out-of-staters?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I don't know that anybody's really bumped up against it too much, so I would have to probably get back to you on that one.
Okay, I'm just, Wyoming's such a unique case, and we have all these public ends, and we don't get proper bill payments. I'm just looking for another angle where we can squeeze not only the feds, but maybe some of the people coming into the state a little bit more to help offset the cost of your department, basically, so we can let them pay for it, the consumers of your services. But anyway, more questions, committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Freeman.
I think you've already answered this, Director, but is there over land-based, I know we have snowmobile stickers. Do we have the stickers for the side-by-sides and the over, and how do they compare nationally?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Freeman, yes, we do offer enrolled trail ORV sticker, similar to the enrolled snowmobile trail sticker for the snowmobiles. I would have to probably either lean on staff or have to get back to you on how that relates to how much other states have in relation to those stickers. You're talking about a comparison, how much we charge versus how much somebody else charges. Yeah, I'd probably have to come back to you with a comparison. We have focused, since we were working directly just recently on a fee increase for state parks. We did do a regional state park fees, but not necessarily the trails, because trails aren't always in a state park system in other states. So, but we can sure do an analysis and get that back out to you.
Mr. Chairman, follow
Hey.
up. The other thing that has been a problem over the years is enforcement to have people buy those. Do you think with the windfall that we should increase enforcement of those stickers?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Freeman, we definitely can. Again, I believe a lot of that enforcement, I think as Representative Flitner asked about, where are majority of these trails? They're on federal service or federal Forest Service property. And they do most of the enforcement up there on our behalf, because a majority of those fees go back to support recreation, trail recreation on their property. And so definitely the enforcement we can work with the Forest Service to see what we can do on not only increased enforcement of compliance of the sticker, but also compliance with some of the other rules that Representative Haley was talking about up there in the parking areas and the use and the proper etiquette and proper consumer experiences that we want everybody to have.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Freeman, I would also throw in on that compliance. We're at about 95 to 96% compliance because it's incredibly popular. People know that money is going directly back to the trails. When it first started, we were in the 20%, and there's enough peer pressure nowadays that people are putting in pressure on those folks to be compliant on those sticker purchases.
Mr. Chairman, that's good to hear.
Okay, good. Further questions, gentlemen and ladies? Okay, Director Westby, you can continue, or are we finished with this part?
Mr. Chairman, I think we're done with a state parks and cultural resource update now. If you'd like, I can turn this over to Chris and talk about those items that we talked to you back in the session about some ideas of funding for the outdoor rec office as well.
Okay, very good. And we have a draft bill to work here in a little bit also.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. That was one that a bill that was discussed last session or session before last, I can't remember now. And through that conversation, that's a great place to lead, and I'll kick it off to Chris. But that bill, there was a lot of discussion, and we heard that discussion, and I know Chris has probably got some potential changes that could help hopefully make that bill a little bit more palatable this go around. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Floyd, our Manager of Outdoor Recreation Office, and let him take it away to talk about the next 5 or 6 ideas.
Very good. Thank you. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Westby. So you have been provided that list of some ideas about how we could fund the Outdoor Recreation Office and outdoor recreation more generally in Wyoming. And I'll just make a quick general comment about the list, and then we'll jump into them item by item. So the first 2 items, as the director said, or at least the first one, you all have seen before, and you saw the second one in a little bit different form. And actually, we've had a few changes after some internal conversations on number 2. And then the other 4 are just some other ideas to consider. And we actually have even one more beyond that we could bring up and just see if there's any interest in it. So starting with the very first item, it's the idea of creating an outdoor recreation trust fund, which could be spent statewide. It would be a fund that could provide for infrastructure projects, maintenance, even access easements if we need to try to connect public parcels. The fund would be able to receive donations, appropriations, grants, gifts, bequests, etc. Only 5% would be for administrative costs. The goal would be to set up a $5 million fund, which we understand that's kind of small in comparison to some, but 2% interest a year on $5 million is $100,000 that could be put back onto the ground. We'd want the fund to have a little time to build up before it could be spent. So we put something about that in there. And we do have the draft available that we shared with some revisions to the prior bill. And we could go through that. I'm not sure how you want to proceed with this, Mr. Chairman, but we can discuss the bill if you'd like, and I can give any comments as needed on any of the changes or whatnot.
Let's go through your handout first and just hit the highlights from that, and then we'll go to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to the second idea, and again, this is the one that there was a previous bill concerning, but we've made some changes to that concept. And actually, we've made some changes to this handout after some continuing discussions internally. The idea here, very simply, is a decal program, sort of like we have for the motorized trails program, but this time for bicycles on state parks lands. So if you, for example, you go to Kurt Gowdy State Park on a weekend, you'll see that the trails are full of bicyclists, largely from Colorado. And the idea would be to sell those stickers for those bikes if you're going to use a bike trail in a state park at a fee of $10 for in-state, and we believe there should be a $20 decal for out-of-state users. The dealers would keep $1 of that price. The rest of it, and this is another change we'd like to discuss, is the idea of putting the money into an outdoor recreation account immediately as it is collected, so that that money could be returned back to the ground as quickly as possible. If you'll notice in the trust fund concept, there's going to be some time involved there to build up that fund before it's available to be spent. But we'd like to go ahead and start getting some outdoor recreation infrastructure on the ground. So that would be a little bit of a change for what we originally proposed on this document here, is not putting it into the trust fund, but putting it into an account immediately, with the idea that you could spend it on not just trail maintenance, but that would certainly be a big part of it, but you could also spend it on other outdoor recreation opportunities and maintenance, as well as some funding for the office itself. That's the second one. Indiana, by the way, has a program like this already, and I was able to reach out to their state parks. That program has been pretty successful. They've had some buy-in from their stakeholder groups. They've had a lot of compliance. They have a couple of parks where they've had some challenges because the kind of recreationalists there. So example, in an urban area, someone just riding their bike into a state park in an urban area might not be as inclined to purchase that decal as someone who is going to a more rural or remote area for the sole purpose of recreating. So so in those cases, they've had a little bit of issue, but the recreationalists who are dedicated bikers who do that all the time, they haven't had any pushback from those folks, and they've been able to put the money back into trails. So, and I'll move on to the third item real quick. This is a concept that I picked up from the state of Georgia, where they recently passed some legislation and went through a referendum to set up an outdoor recreation stewardship fund. And what they did was they redirected existing sales taxes from sporting goods stores and put those sales tax expenditures into that fund. So they didn't actually raise taxes. They just diverted some of the existing taxes there to populate that fund. And so we're calling for, or suggesting the idea anyway, that you could do the same thing in Wyoming, but you could charge 1 penny out of the 4 pennies on every sale of a outdoor recreation equipment item, and put that into the outdoor recreation trust fund. And we would put a sunset on it too. Once the fund is active and has reached its $5 million, then that would go away, and the either the diversion or an additional 1% tax on top of the existing sales tax would go away. We made sure that this would exclude any items that are already taxed by Pittman-Robertson or Dingell-Johnson legislation, which is for firearms, ammunition, archery equipment, and fishing tackle. We also would exclude horse saddlery and tack. So you're looking at, essentially think of things, you know, in the camping and outdoor recreation section of a store that you see on the shelf. So tents and sleeping bags and paddles and things like that for recreation. So the next idea is the possibility of a real estate transfer tax or deed recording fee, which could fund the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. You know, we're certainly seeing a lot of influx of out-of-state buyers and a lot of turnover in real estate here lately. And this may be a way to tap into some of that. But honestly, we have not spent a lot of time delving into it to see what that would result in. So number 5 is the possibility of starting a new scratch ticket program for the lottery. I don't believe we have one right now, but it could be a recreational scratch fee program, and 45% of the funds could go into the Recreation Trust Fund. And again, once that fund is set up, that program could go away if needed. Number 6, and this one was suggested to me by another legislator, excuse me, in a phone conversation recently, and we didn't really spend a lot of time developing it. He just planted the seed, and I kind of ran with it and thought about it a little bit and figured out how that might work. We are seeing, not so much on state parks, but we are seeing a lot of use and abuse this year. With all these folks coming in and crowding some of our public lands. And so what we were thinking is that with that increased use and the increased number of violations, what we might be able to do is tack on a restitution fee on top of any fines for any violations of state rules, whether state parks or game and fish or just general state laws on federal or state lands. So you pay a fine for a violation, but then on top of that, there'd be another $15 restitution fee that could go into the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. And that might help send a message to recreationalists that we are serious about having the proper etiquette when folks recreate, and that folks be respectful of our natural and cultural resources. So again, that also though could expire once the Recreation Trust Fund is activated. There is one more idea that came up, but it's not on this list, and it's something we could consider, and that is the idea of a recreation stamp, which would be required on top of each state park's annual pass or camping pass, and it would be a $2 stamp. $1 could go to the Recreation Trust Fund, and the other $1 would go to, for example, weed and pest or another natural resource type fund or account that could help mitigate any issues that arise from increased recreational use, such as spreading invasives. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my list of ideas, and we can go from there wherever you'd like to go.
Okay, committee, what's your pleasure here? Does anyone want to discuss any of those options, or
Mr. Chairman,
should we?
I do.
Senator Manise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to page 2, item D. How many levels of trails are there?
Well, there's at least 3, and there can be as many as 5. But beginners are obviously just easier trails to navigate, but there are intermediate and more difficult trails on top of that. And those are the ones we're talking about the fee on.
And then on to item F, class 1 e-bikes. What's a class 1 e-bike?
Yes, sir. Electric bicycles are a new thing, and they are getting increasingly popular. And we're trying to actually work through some rule changes to accommodate all of that. So an electric bike is just what it says. It has a battery, and it's electric powered, and you can, on a class 1 bike, you get some pedal assistance. So in other words, when you're pedaling, it gives you a little bit of juice to help you go a little bit farther. And it only provides assistance up to 20 miles an hour. Once you're going beyond 20 miles an hour, it cuts off. A class 2 e-bike provides you with continuous full propulsion until you reach 20 miles an hour. And class 3 gives you that same full propulsion up to 28 miles an hour. So class 1 is just a pedal assist. Class 2 and class 3 are driven by that electric motor. So that's the difference.
Thank you. Then my final question, Mr. Chairman, is on item number 3. where you're proposing a tax on outdoor recreation equipment, how do you differentiate between outdoor recreation equipment and hunters that would be purchasing similar equipment? Are we going to be taxing our hunting community as well for, as they would see it, probably an additional tax?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Manise, that would have to be spelled out in the legislation to identify specific items. What you could say is if an item is camouflaged, it's exempt, for example, something like that. There might be a way to do that. The way the state of Georgia did it, they just did all sporting goods sales from sporting goods stores. You could also enumerate more specifically the items you're talking about, and you could even limit them to just certain items if you so choose.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions? Further questions? Okay. Representative Healy.
Did you call on me?
I did. Representative Haley.
Okay, you're breaking up, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions. Probably the first and foremost, to me, the most important one is that if you don't use the PR and DJ Act money properly, then you can lose the entire amount, which is several $million that the Game and Fish currently gets to manage game. And I wonder if in your research you visited with the Game and Fish Administration to find out if what you're proposing would cause the Game and Fish to lose all that money. We've had these discussions before with other things that's come up in TRW. Another question is, what do the other states charge? I was going to say non-motorized, but with these e-bikes and the conflicts that they're starting to create with other non-motorized users, is that $10 or $20 fair considering what we charge ORV users and snowmobile users? And I guess like the real estate transfer fee, what the heck does that have to do with non-motorized bicycle trails? I just don't think that trying to get money from all these sources that doesn't have anything to do with bicycles or non-motorized, whatever you want to call it, is fair to those other people. I think that the user that's using these bike trails ought to be paying for the maintenance and the creation of them. It's just like if I take my boat to Rob Roy, if I'm going to use their boat ramp, I have to pay each time I use it. So I don't see where really, to me, the difference is. And I think that they ought to pay their own way. And I don't think under this plan they are, but that's just my own opinion. And I'm not to be full disclosure, I don't own a bicycle.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Haley, for those questions. And I apologize, I may not have been as clear as I needed to be in my presentation. To answer the question about Pittman Robertson or Dingell Johnson dollars, what we were asking for there is a diversion of the existing sales tax on outdoor recreation equipment and exclude any items that would be taxed under Pittman Robertson or Dingell Johnson. So no double taxing, no overlapping on any of those items, no diversion of those funds whatsoever. The idea would be that the state has a 4% sales tax, take 1 penny of that on outdoor recreation items and divert that to an outdoor recreation trust fund. On the question, I'm sorry.
Okay, those are federal acts. We can't create legislation to change a federal act. And if you want to increase the state sales tax, then that's a different ball game, right? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haley, we're not asking to alter Pittman Robertson or Dingell Johnson in any way. nor to divert those funds anywhere else. We're simply asking to consider the concept of taking 1 penny out of the 4 pennies in an existing state sales tax and divert that to an outdoor recreation trust fund.
I think we got it, Chris. You know, you're not touching Pitt and Robertson or Daniel Johnson at all, according to your language here. But you are considering taking a part of the existing sales tax, and I know the cities, towns, and counties would have a large say in that, diverting any of those funds. And the chance of an additional 1% being tacked on right now, to sales tax, I don't think is probably real high. But with that, I think Representative Freeman had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the idea that we're thinking outside of the box and looking at different sort of things. I like the idea of as a trust fund. One of the problems that I see with all of these things is that they go up to $5 billion and then they stop, and then we have $100,000 to go out for recreation. I've been kind of monitoring what's happening with cities and stuff, and they're in a financial bind, and the first thing that they're doing is they're cutting recreation. And so I understand getting the trust going on there, but I think there's got to be ongoing funds for cities and counties and frankly your department, to where that you can meet the demands that we've been seeing in the last 6 or 7 months. So going up and then stopping and then relying on $100,000 is not solving a lot of the problems. When we talked, and right now the name escapes me, but the federal program that we get almost $2 million from, that's more something that we would want to create if we really want to cash in on the possibility of outdoor recreation in Wyoming. I don't have the answers, but I think that somewhere while you're looking at the big picture, and I understand these are preliminary, is you have to have an ongoing source of income. And as an owner of 3 bikes, I don't mind paying for my bikes. I really don't. But we're going to Cheyenne this weekend, and we're having 3 little kids, and they have bikes, and we're going to use the Greenway in Cheyenne, and the Greenway in Cheyenne needs money. So to put a $2 one-time fee on when you sell a bicycle to a little kid, to where that you can upgrade those bike pathways and that kind of stuff, that makes sense to me. And to make sure that that money gets to places like Cheyenne, who has it, Casper, even Green River has programs like that. So I think that the long-term outdoor recreation, you have to think in those lines. I don't have the answers, and I'm just kind of being a terrorist throwing a Molotov cocktail, but I think these are great ideas. But I think you have to think about the longevity of what you're proposing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I could kind of tie on to Representative Freeman's comments, thank you for those, and we agree, which is why we're looking internally through the state park system and the Office of Outdoor Recreation and the other executive branch teams that will help us be successful with elevating recreation and outdoor recreation in our state. We truly agree that now is the time to be doubling down on everything that we're doing to be that growth leader within the state. I also want to just remind everybody that I appreciate my staff's efforts of going out and just really thinking outside the box on how we can do anything and everything. We're all grabbing at straws. Let's just be honest. We're an agency that's continuing to see our general fund decrease, but seeing our our need and our visitation going up. And so everybody's grasping and just coming up with some really out of the box thinking and ideas to try to help us help you and the rest of the state of Wyoming. So albeit some of these, Representative Haley, I think I'll just address your comment. Don't see how they tie together. We may not either, but what we did was a lot of research on what other states were doing around the country to try to shore up their funding streams. And this was one of them. And I think, as Chris Floyd said, we haven't really dug too deep into it, but since we put it on a list back in February, we thought we better put it back on the list for discussion today, whether it goes anywhere or not. But I really appreciate the conversation. And to go back to Representative Freeman, your comments about looking long term, I think that 5 million mark that you're probably talking about is the way the trust fund bill is drafted is we can't touch any of that money until the fund hits 5 million, at least 5 million, or a certain date. And then after that, we can start pulling off the interest of that trust fund. Hopefully we can continue to grow that trust fund to even rival the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund, which is very significant, and they operate and do tremendous conservation work around the state. So that's kind of the intent of the trust fund, is kind of mirrored around that same concept.
Thank you, Director Westby and Ms. Floyd. We appreciate the efforts on this, and you were thinking out of the box with that long list of possible options. Personally, I like to see the consumers of a service pay for that service. So as much as we can keep focus on that angle, the people using the trails, the people using the campgrounds, the people using the boat docks, letting them pay and covering all or part of those costs is how our items I pay favorable attention to. But with that, Mr. Freeman, you have some more comments?
I just want to reiterate that I appreciate you guys thinking out of the box, and I realize that these are preliminary. And I'm sorry that I was a terrorist with a Molotov cocktail, but I like your thoughts, and my main emphasis is that we have to think for long-term solutions. And I'm like Chairman Mueller. I like user taxes. If I'm using a resource, I think I should help pay for it, realizing that a lot of those resources we can't get the full money out of it. Like who uses a pathway that's in a city? Almost everybody. So anyway, just want to make that point perfectly clear.
Okay, thank you, Representative Freeman. Mr. Co-Chair, are you back with us? Maybe not.
Senator James has a question.
Oh, Senator James, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a quick question. Currently, as of December of 18, there was about $15 million in the Cultural Trust Fund, and I didn't see anything currently in statute that prevented them from transferring about $5 million over into this other trust fund, which would make it currently available for them to start gaining interest on this new account. That way you wouldn't have to enact any of these taxes or fees, which they're wanting to do. So is there any reason why they can't do that instead of asking for all these taxes and fees?
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to address that, Senator James, we're talking two complete different consumer bases there. The Cultural and Trust Fund is specifically set aside for try to enhance the community livability within everybody's lives. And so, albeit outdoor recreation is a community livability, but it's not a cultural community livability piece. And so to diminish one leg to shore up another doesn't make sense to us in the relation that we're still behind in the Cultural Trust Fund. We've been successful last year to get $1 million added to that trust fund. Our goal was to try to get to 20 million by this year, but we did not receive the funds to get that trust fund up. We were fortunate with the help of this body last year to gain another million in that trust fund. I would sure hate to go backwards and diminish the cultural side of the house of our state to shore up one other. When I looking at it from a reason behind it, I do truly believe that outdoor recreation is something that we should be focusing our energies on, as well as our resources, not only human, but financial. It has the ability to surely return that investment and then some. And so to diminish one to pay the other, I'm not in that same camp. I appreciate your comment, though.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, statutorily that, thank you. Statutorily that trust account's only required to be at $4 million. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're making it sound like it's still only at $15 million. I may be wrong, but that's the $15 million at December of 18. Is that currently the amount right now, $15 million?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I believe we're just close to 16 million. We put in a request last year to take it to 20 million. It got reduced by the governor. Our request got reduced by the governor, and this body landed on 1 million to give the Cultural Trust Fund last year.
Roger that. And Mr. Chairman, so if we were to take that $5 million, we wouldn't have to put that financial burden on the people to fund this brand new account. So I think it would be a good idea to transfer that. Now, granted, it is not up to you. It is up to the board, which they do have the statutory ability to transfer those funds. So I think that we should do that, because right now in this time, it's not right for us to put additional taxes and fees on the people when a lot of people within the private sector are struggling. It's, they don't have the money right now to get out and do that much. So it's not, it's just not right to do that to them. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I'm going to have to push back a little bit. I think our visitation numbers and the numbers that you're seeing across the state are argumentative to your thought on people can't go out and recreate. I think what we're seeing is there's a much more recreation going on right now, and regardless of the cost, they're going to do it. And that's not to say that I'm willing to go up and just charge astronomical rates. I'm asking to take monies out of one pot, put it in another that I can't touch until it starts generating interest. And so, the money is coordinated by, the Cultural Trust Fund is coordinated from the Cultural Trust Fund board, but I can almost guarantee you that would be a tough call for them to transfer their money out of their board for cultural resources to outdoor resources. So I'm not sure how that would go very well from the constituents of the state of Wyoming that are the beneficiaries of that trust fund grant recipients as well.
And Mr. Chairman, well, the reason why they come up here is because we are able to allow them to come up here at a cheaper rate than everywhere else. Everywhere else is so much more expensive to recreate. So if we start raising prices and start adding taxes and fees to everything else, they're not going to want to come up here anymore. So
Mr. Chairman?
we got to make sure that we make it affordable for them to come up here.
Representative Flitner.
Mr. Chairman, I think the point's been made by Senator James. If we could maybe move on, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we heard from Senator James and his concern about possibly using the Cultural Resources Fund. That brought me thinking of a question. Have we had private donations to the Cultural Resources Fund?
Mr. Chairman, we have, but we have not seen a significant amount of influx of private donations into that count.
And this proposed bill also allows private donations into that recreational trust fund also. I think you might have better luck there if we were to pass that bill.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. There are some large outdoor recreation companies that are direct beneficiaries of us growing our product, and they would really like to jump on. There's a lot of conversation right now of sponsorship within the state of Wyoming and our outdoor recreation products. And I'm not 100% on that bus of, NASCARing our state park system, but if we continue down the path that we're on, we're going to have to rely on private sponsorships to help maintain our parks financially. I hope we don't get there.
If it's okay with the committee, if no one has any further questions, can we move on to the draft bill that you have before us? Any opposition to that, moving to the draft bill? Okay, seeing none.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mary Beth with LSO to share her screen on the bill that was presented. Chris took it upon himself to go through the bill and put some potential amendments for the conversation that he had a little bit earlier, if that makes it easier for conversation.
Well, it might. What I want to do is kind of take a straw poll first before we get into the nitty gritty of the bill, whether there's an interest in moving this bill forward. And so with that, if you're interested in moving the bill forward and working the bill and coming out with a committee bill, please raise your hand. And Mary Beth, can you take a straw poll for us? Those are interested in moving this bill forward to the legislature,
Mr. Chairman,
please raise.
I believe I counted 5 members.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure everyone got their hands up. You have 5?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I can recount if everyone wants to put up their hands now.
Okay, let's do it one more time. If you want us to work the bill and move it forward, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll probably just briefly discuss the bill and go on the rest of our agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I counted 5 members. I believe there are 13 members present.
Okay, so that does not pass. So I think, Director Westby, the consensus right now is the committee does not want to move that bill forward, but that doesn't prevent any individual on the committee to bring this as an individual bill for the upcoming general session. And I would, those that have an interest in this, I'd highly recommend that they do that. And so it gets vetted out by the full legislature.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the committee's time and thought and discussion on this topic, as well as staff's, both LSO as well as state park staff that worked on getting it to this point. I think it's gone through some good iterations, and we will, as an agency, as well as the executive branch, continue to work on trying to fund this very important piece of the outdoor recreation and tourism industry. Thank you again for your time and hope to see you guys soon.
Okay, well, thank you, Director, and Chris, thank you for your presentation on this. I think the current financial state of the state, I'm hesitant to vote to move this forward myself. So thank you for that. And I guess with that, anyone else have any comments before we move on to the next topic? Okay, I'm seeing no hands or no one saying anything. So Director, thank you. And we're going to go to the 2 o'clock topic. the Wyoming Conservation Corps. And I don't know if Mr. Fried is here.
Yes,
Mary Beth.
it's
Mr. Chairman,
right
he
here.
is present.
Okay, very good. Mr. Fried, you're up.
great. And so maybe some prompting would be helpful for myself, but I'll give a little background. My name is Jim Freed. I am the program director for the Wyoming Conservation Corps. We're a nonprofit housed in the University of Wyoming here in the state. And I believe I'm here to speak about maybe the benefits of conservation corps. And I know that there's thought and some consideration going into having a youth corps in the state, which I think could be very helpful. But if there's any specific questions, or Mary Beth, if you have some prompts for me, I'd be happy to speak about.
Well, do we have a draft bill on this, Mary Beth, or?
Mr. Chairman, you do not. You do have a fact sheet that I did prepare for you guys that includes youth conservation corps throughout the Mountain West states. I believe that is appendices 8-1, and I emailed it, I believe, last night, maybe.
Okay, can you bring that up and can Jim walk us through that?
Mr. Chairman, if you give me just 1 second, I can get that ready.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead. Don?
just as a way of maybe reminding the committee, the creation of a CCC program for youth was a topic, an interim topic that was added to the committee's topic list as part of the COVID-19 related work on Management Council. So I just wanted to, I guess, again, remind you why this is on the agenda, why we've asked Mr. Freed.
Okay, well, I have these all set up in my queue to bring it up, but I can't bring it up right now. If Mary Beth can bring it up and put it on the screen for us, that'd be great. Uh-oh.
Chairman, is it up and can you see it?
Yeah, very good. Did you do it, or did Mr. Freed do this?
Mr. Chairman, I prepared this for you, for the committee.
Okay, you want to walk us through it briefly, and Mr. Freed can chime in as he sees fit.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Again, this is a quick fact sheet on youth conservation corps in the Mountain West states. Just real briefly, it looks like Colorado, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, and Utah all offer state or local youth corps programs. Nebraska and North Dakota actually offer programs through federal agencies. I didn't dive in too much, but as you can see, it looks like Colorado does offer a program that has a cost. I don't believe any of the other programs have that. Really, I think that sums it all up.
Okay, and now Wyoming already has an existing youth conservation corps, is that correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, I run the Wyoming Conservation Corps. It's a conservation organization for young adults, 18 and up. So we're an AmeriCorps program that kind of it gives people work skills, but they have to be an adult. So what a lot of youth corps are generally 14 to 17 years of age. It's kind of a program to introduce youth to public lands, give them job training, teach them these skills to get into the labor force or go back to school, having learned these different types of skills.
Okay, doing a new program for youth, would you be asking the state for funds to be able to do that, or are there federal funds available?
Well, I think that might be more of a question for Mary Beth, but to my knowledge, most of the youth corps that Mary Beth just spoke about, a lot of them get federal funding through AmeriCorps and other entities like that. I do not know how many of those are getting funds from the state.
Okay, Mary Beth, do you have anything to add to that?
Mr. Chairman, I do not, other than this is just like, as Mr. Brody had mentioned, something for the committee to explore at this point.
Okay, very good. Senator James.
So is this program kind of like Job Corps?
Yes, it is. It's under the AmeriCorps banner, similar to Job Corps. There's a lot of different facets of AmeriCorps and like work programs. So yes, it would be closely related. More usually, these youth corps are more geared towards trail building and work on public land specifically.
Okay, further questions?
Mr.
Further
Chairman,
questions? Representative Freeman.
could Mr. Freed talk about some of the projects that have been undertaken in the last couple of years with his program?
Mr. Freed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. So we typically work with state parks, with Director Westby and Wyoming State Parks. We have multiple projects at Kirk Gowdy, at Glendo, a lot of trail projects, a lot of historic preservation on the state parks side of things. We also partner with a multitude of national forests and different ranger districts across the state. Some of the projects in the last few years specifically have been invasive removal from Russian olives and thistle. We do fuels reduction, so we get rid of beetle-killed pine trees that are still existing in the forest, cut them down for the forest. We do a lot of wildlife-friendly fencing with the BLM. We have partnerships with Devon Energy where we do other cultural and historical preservation projects. But our partnerships range from citywide to state to national in terms of the contacts and the agencies that contract with us. But mainly a lot of fencing, trail work, trail maintenance, and invasive removal projects.
Okay, thank you. Further comments, committee? Further comments? Don't see any hands. Okay, Ms. Freed, we're going to close this out. Any closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess moving forward, if there's any other questions about conservation corps or any support that we could provide, I would be happy to engage in those conversations. And especially with the Wyoming Conservation Corps' perspective, if another conservation corps, youth corps were to be part of the state, we would do anything we could to provide mentorship, training, and any other services that would be applicable.
Well, thank you for your presentation, and we know where to find you now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, committee, moving on. Don't see any hands up. We're ready for the 3 o'clock discussion for Pilot Hill project. And is Jason Crowder in the room?
Mr. Chairman, I have just admitted Mr. Crowder.
Very good. Mr. Crowder, you're up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. How are you?
Very good. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, we were asked to provide an update on our Pilot Hill exchange and the process that led us to that and what's happened since. And so I'm happy to provide the committee with an update this afternoon about that exchange. As you all are aware, this office and particularly myself are very much black and white, very much about the nuts and bolts and dollars and cents. So I've also invited Chairman Terry Jones from the Albany County Commissioners, who we leased this property to provide a little bit more color about the actual use of the property today and going forward. So Mr. Chairman, with that, I would be happy to answer any questions or go in any direction you'd like, or just dive into my presentation as I've prepared.
Well, I guess your presentation, you'll be referring to that plan overview map that you sent us.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at that right now. And if you want to go into your presentation, I'm not looking at the group right now. Let's see. Anyone have any questions before we move on to the presentation? Seeing none, so please continue, Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a transaction that we as the Office of State Lands and Investments have worked on for quite some time. We had received our initial application to begin the transaction back in June of 2018 from Mr. Doug Samuelson. Mr. Doug Samuelson represented many entities that had originally owned all of the property that composes the public or the Pilot Hill property. He submitted that application in June, on June 13th of 2018. We brought it in front of the Board of Land Commissioners on June 21st of 2018, which the board gave us initial approval to move forward with the analysis process. And that's simply all they approved at that point, was to allow us to begin the work, to look into the property, to try to understand all of the attributes, the ins and outs, and how it might measure up against the trust land management objectives. We did begin that effort. It began as a transaction of 5,528 acres of deeded land, known as the Pilot Hill property, in exchange for as many parcels of state trust land as would make up a value for value exchange. And at the time, we had identified 24,611 acres of state trust land that might be suitable for this type of transaction, meaning that we had been approached by the lessees of those properties that they may be interested in acquiring their state trust land. And if an exchange presented itself, because they didn't have one particularly identified at the time, they'd like to be a part of it. So we had them down on a list. We went through our initial process of due diligence to ensure that those parcels of state trust land were something that the board may like to dispose of. Again, understanding our trust land management objectives of revenue generation, value enhancement, management, and community need. And a few of those fell out because of those. Some of those were publicly accessible and had some good public recreational attributes to them. And so they dropped off the list at that point. We also began an appraisal process to make sure that everybody understood what the value of those parcels were, what they may be expected to pay if they move forward in the process. And as you might expect, once value started rolling in, a lot of other individuals fell out of the process at that point. So we began our process with a much truncated list. In fact, we ended up with only 11,668 acres out of the original 24,000 acres involved in that. And that brought us very close to a value for value exchange. But let me back up just a little bit. Prior to reaching that point, Mr. Doug Samuelson was successful in reaching an agreement with the University of Wyoming, in which he sold a portion of the Pilot Hill property to the university and closed on that in November of 2019. Obviously, that reduced the original acreage that we were looking at, which reduced the amount of state trust land we needed to make a value for value exchange work. So when we were brought down to 11,668 acres of state trust land, that brought us down to an appraised value of $7,980,000.02 based on rounding. We also did an appraisal of the Pilot Hill property, or what was left, the 4,343 acres, and that came in right in at $8 million. So we had a bit of a discrepancy there, not a direct value for value. So existing statute allows us to apply a cash equalization payment in a situation like that. And in this case, that cash equalization payment was applied. It was just over $19,999, or just under $20,000. And so the board approved payment of that cash equalization payment, to Mr. Samuelson to create a value for value exchange. And we move forward with it from there. We published a detailed analysis to the public, which talks about all of the attributes of the properties we were talking about, all of their water rights, all of their income generating potentials on both sides, how they might appreciate over time in value. And we completed that and published it on April 2nd of 2020. Our rules and existing statute also require that we hold a public comment period as well as a public hearing in the county that this transaction might affect. This was right in the middle of COVID, so we were able to do that virtually. We had several people attend a public hearing. We held that public hearing on May 5th virtually, solicited public comments for 60 days, really received nothing but positive comments to the transaction, all from the increase in public access, the type of public access that would be contemplated on the property, and the increase in revenue to the state of Wyoming. So we presented the whole transaction after completing that public comment period, presented all the public comments that we received to the Board of Land Commissioners on June 6th of 2020, in which they approved the exchange. And we started working towards closing of the property at that point in time. We did close on that property. We successfully closed it and did that on August 14th of 2020. In the meantime, we were negotiating a special use lease with the Albany County Commissioners to do recreational use on the whole property. And the Board of Land Commissioners did approve that negotiation on July 16th, 2020. But what's important to note about that special use lease is it's not a new thing for the office to lease for recreational purposes, but it is to do one of this size and of this nature and this close to a large population like the city of Laramie and the city of Cheyenne. So when we negotiated that special use lease, we put on a couple extra provisions onto the Albany County Commissioners to ensure that the original intent of the transaction was maintained for a certain amount of time, and that the intent of the whole public around this area of the state was complied with. They understood this transaction to be really important to the economy of the region, to the ability for the local residents and incoming residents to recreate on the property. We wanted to make sure that maintained. So the extra provisions we put on that lease was that the lessee shall manage the entire property in concert with the University of Wyoming property. So even though we didn't acquire the full property and the University of Wyoming did, it's all going to be managed under the same umbrella and in the same way. So trails and use and restrictions and anything else are consistent among the whole property. The lessee shall not allow any activity that would reasonably likely cause pollution of the groundwater. One of the things I'll speak about here in a minute is that the Casper Aquifer underlies a good chunk of the property, and that's the city of Laramie's major water source. And we wanted to ensure that there wouldn't be any pollution that would be brought to that groundwater source. The next one would be that the lessee shall not allow activity that will cause objectionable noise, smoke, or odors. And the final one is that the lessee shall maintain as much as reasonably possible the property in its current natural state, consistent with allowing public access to non-motorized recreation on the site. Reasonable motorized access would be allowed as necessary for activities including law enforcement, maintenance, and emergency access to authorized personnel. And again, I'll let Commissioner Jones and anybody else she's invited to add a little bit more color about how they are managing under that lease. And that would be the first map that I provided to the committee, is their master project plan moving forward. Where this office came into play is obviously a fiduciary one in making sure that the exchange met those trust line management objectives, was a benefit to the state's trust beneficiaries, increased revenue for us, increased value as far as land appreciation and the like. And so that would be the second map that I provided to the committee. It shows all of the state land parcels, the isolated state land parcels that were involved in the exchange, as well as where the Pilot Hill property that we acquired is located in proximity to the National Forest, Pole Mountain, and the city of Laramie. And as I mentioned before, the trust line management objectives are our guiding document in any transaction that we do or long-term lease. We have 3 objectives, and they are managed in priority order. The first priority is to better meet the beneficiary's short and long-term objectives. The second objective is to improve the manageability of the land asset. And the third is to meet a specific school or community need. So as I mentioned before, we did increase annual use revenue on this property by a little over $10,000 per year. We had existing grazing leases on the isolated parcels. Those totaled just over $25,000 per year in revenue. This special use lease to the Albany County Commissioners will return us $35,000 per year in annual revenue. Additionally, in special use leases, we are asked to maintain a hedge against inflation. And so we add an annual escalator to all of our special use leases to make sure that they are keeping pace with inflation, and that lease remains of value to the beneficiaries over time. So this particular lease, in addition to paying $35,000 a year is subject to an escalator of 2.35% annually. We had to pay that cash equalization payment, as I mentioned before, of just under $20,000. Those funds were held within the Common School Permanent Land Fund. They are available for us to use in land acquisitions or cash equalization payments. So we pulled that out of the pot that is currently invested through the State Treasurer's Office. It was yielding just about 3.5%, if I remember. So the math on that is we would lose just under $500 per year in investment income. We did increase our appreciation or value potential over time. Obviously, appreciation is only realized upon sale and is very subjective to markets. However, it is something that we need to measure to ensure that the asset is performing appropriately. We found through our analysis that this existing state trust land was appreciating at a rate of 2.96%, and that the Pilot Hill property could appreciate at a rate of 3.5%. That's just over 0.5% increase in annual appreciation or annual value gain back to the beneficiaries. And that, if you did the math, equates to about $150,000 per year of value add just based off of appreciation. Our second objective is the manageability of the land asset. This was a win for us as well as far as consolidating ownership patterns. As you can see from the second map, the existing state trust land was largely scattered under a variety of different leases, all taking management time and effort and budget to manage each one of those individually. And we found that when we can consolidate ownership patterns into one block, our management costs go down. We're also able to leverage other management from additional state agencies. The Game and Fish Department are a very big partner in this transaction. They will offer enforcement and enforcement of all the board's rules and existing statutes so that our field staff don't have to do all of that work. And the major leverage is of the Albany County Commissioners and all of the resources that they bring as far as enforcement, maintaining the value of the property and ensuring degradation doesn't occur. The third objective is to meet a specific school or community need, and this is where the public access component comes into it. Part of that specific community need is what is the economic impact to the region. Other things like concentrated management and protection of the Casper Aquifer. But again, the public access is another big component of this. You'll notice in that second map, all of those isolated parcels of state trust land were not accessible by the public with the exception of 480 acres in Wyoming County. So that's a net increase of 3,759 acres of publicly accessible land to the public in the southeast corner of the state. So the long-term benefits that we saw were very big. I just went through all of the trust land management objectives and they were all positive in those areas. But one of the major things that we see this property being is kind of a short-term investment for us. So the Office of State Lands and Investments has been managing land for 130 years and hopes to do so for another 130, but has maintained largely the existing ownership that we started with 130 years ago. This property, as I said, is just slightly outside the norm of our management scheme, and not that we can do it, and we believe we're doing it well, but it is something that we feel like we could turn over at some point in the future and acquire property that more fits within the line of our management scheme, that being commercial development, grazing and agricultural leases, timber harvesting and the like. And so we anticipate the value of this property to increase at a rate of 3.5% for the Board of Land Commissioners to take advantage of that appreciation 10 or more years down the road by a sale. Maybe that could be to state parks, maybe that could be to Albany County if the economy turns around. We've done this in the past and we see that as a benefit to where we could use those funds to acquire other property going forward. One of the other things to mention that is important is that we maintain a no net gain of acreage owned by the Board of Land Commissioners within the state of Wyoming. We maintain a no net gain of 10,000 acres above and below a baseline that was set in fiscal year 1999. This transaction, by losing the 11,000 acres of state trust land, brought us 3,633 acres below that baseline. So we're still within the 10,000 acre limit above and below, but we're currently 3,600 acres below that. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the black and white of the transaction. I know the commissioner will do a great job of explaining all the benefits for public recreational users in the state going forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you for that extensive explanation of this done deal. You know, committee, this deal's already been completed from what I understand. So we're getting a presentation here of what was done. The scattered state sections were traded. I believe on your images here, the first page, that blue area where it's potential wildlife habitat management area, that's the majority of the new land acquired. Is that right, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, very good. And it sounds like there are some restrictions on that land. Can the state sell that land if they choose at some point in the future?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing that up. I glossed over my note about that. There are restrictions. The property, the original intent of the property is that it not be sold for 50 years. And that was when the existing or the previous owner, Mr. Samuelson, was in contract direct with Albany County. We have since removed that restriction from the deed, so the Board of Land Commissioners could sell it at any point in the future if the situation presented itself. But through those negotiations, we made it clear to that previous landowner that we wanted to honor the intent of his transaction as much as we possibly could. And we feel like we can do that with our management plan going forward. The other part about restrictions, if I can add on to that, Mr. Chairman, very quickly, is that the Board of Land Commissioners did approve a recreational restriction on the whole property. And that's just an administrative effort that would allow the Albany County Commissioners and the Pilot Hill Group to ensure that they had management authority of the recreational use on that property. So the board has given the authority to manage how the public will use that property, restricting driving, restricting recreational shooting and the like, left that to the Albany County Commissioners and not on the Board of Land Commissioners anymore.
Okay, may want to expand that a little bit. Do we do that elsewhere on state lands?
Mr. Chairman, the Board of Land Commissioners does have the ability to restrict public use on any state trust land across the state of Wyoming. They have done that from time to time. Of the full 3.9 million acres of state trust land, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe 75,000 are restricted in some manner to public use. A lot of those are around coal mines. Some of those have safety concerns where shooting next to buildings doesn't seem feasible. Some of that is where we had extensive trash dumping on state trust land. So hunting's still allowed, but driving may not be. And a good chunk of that is when we enroll state trust land within a game and fish public access management area, like a walk-in area or a hunter management area.
You know, the part I was concerned about was the county commissioners make the rules. Did I hear you say that?
Mr. Chairman, that is very specific to this situation, but that is true.
So the state lands department won't have the direction anymore on managing these lands. It'll be the county commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, through the land use plan that the Pilot Hill Group has approved and the Albany County Commissioners have approved, the Board of Land Commissioners agreed that that was a proper use of recreation on the property. So they did allow the county commissioners to manage recreational use pursuant to that land use plan, and I should have mentioned that earlier. At any point in time, the Board of Land Commissioners can rescind that. But right now, they've granted that to the Albany County Commissioners.
Okay, was some of the acquired lands split title lands, or were they all deeded surface and minerals?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, you broke up. Which land are you talking about?
Well, the acquired land, the new land next to Laramie, is that split title lands, or is it just surface land, or who owns the mineral rights below those lands?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. And to clarify, the state trust land that we did dispose of, we retained all of the mineral rights under that property. A statute requires that we do that. In this acquisition side of the exchange, we did acquire any minerals that the previous landowner held. And we haven't done a mineral title research to understand what that is. And we do believe he doesn't own the full estate. So there is some split estate within this transaction, but anything that he owned that he could transfer, we did acquire.
Okay, well, I assume that the odd numbered sections are former railroad lands. You know?
Mr. Chairman, you broke up a little bit, but I do know that a portion of that property was originally railroad lands that had been bought and sold through time. We didn't do any transaction with the railroad.
I'm just wondering how this fits into the resale of the Occidental lands, and some of these mineral rights here might be encumbered by some of the things that we're making happen on the surface here. I don't know if you've researched that or looked into that.
Mr. Chairman, we were heavily involved in the Occidental land acquisition process. And we do know that there were some mineral acres within this property that, should the state have acquired that property, would have owned that mineral estate. But it is it is currently owned by Oxy and whoever ends up acquiring that property is.
Okay, well, I think that's a potential issue in the future that I don't want to get Wyoming in legal trouble over if somehow we've condemned their mineral rights right after they purchased those lands. But that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, that's a great point. Under the Board of Land Commissioners ownership, we wouldn't be condemning that. However, if another state agency owned it, possibly that could be the case.
Well, it's the county that controls it now, it's like.
Well, yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's true. They have the special use lease, but the Board of Land Commissioners maintains ownership.
Okay. Commit more questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Ms. Matthews, I believe, wanted to make a comment.
Okay. Where's that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
this is Sarah Brown Matthews. I'm the Executive Director of Pilot Hill and am joining your meeting at the request of Commissioner Terry Jones. I just wanted to provide a little more information about the Occidental mineral rights on the property, if I may do so.
Yeah, please proceed.
Early in the year 2020, Occidental partnered with the Pilot Hill Committee and did a quick deed releasing the surface access rights to the minerals that they own within the Pilot Hill management area. So although they retained the mineral ownership, they did gift the surface access rights to those minerals to Pilot Hill. That allowed us to move forward with confidence, trusting that any of the limestone in the area that could be potentially interesting for mining purposes was protected.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Matthews?
No, I'm certainly happy to talk with you about the land use plan that was developed by the community in partnership with a firm that we contracted to help us organize this process. That process has been ongoing for a year now and was a truly collaborative opportunity for us to bring the community to the table to really help us determine what the priorities were for the community. We knew that from earlier surveys, there was a tremendous interest by the community members to both protect the open space, the aquifer recharge zone, and wildlife on the property, and to allow for non-motorized recreation for the benefit of our community in numerous ways. We did that in a really balanced format. You can see on the maps that nearly half of the property is protected as a WHMA, and recently the Wyoming Game and Fish Commissioners did approve that WHMA partnership with us. The other northern portion of the property that is more suitable for the recreation corridor is primarily in partnership with the university and with a small BLM tract in there. And that will provide the opportunity for us to develop multi-use trail systems that connect the town of Laramie with the Medicine Bow National Forest, and eventually onto trail systems that we hope will connect with Kurt Gowdy State Park, creating a win-win opportunity for recreation lovers in our area to go all the way from Cheyenne to Laramie and perhaps in the future to Fort Collins. We feel like this is going to be beneficial not only to recreational users, but just before this meeting, I was out on the property with a group of students from the University of Wyoming who are already doing research on the property, who are studying the aquifer aspects of the land, and really turning this into a research laboratory for our university and our middle school, high school, elementary students in the Laramie community as a resource. If you have specific questions about our plans, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Okay, any questions made for Ms. Matthews? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you for your comments. Okay, committee, back to Mr. Crowder. Do you have any questions for him on the whole Pilot Hill project? That's a done deal. I don't see any question or comment. So thank you, Ms. Matthews, and thank you, Mr. Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, it looks like you do have some public comment. I believe Mr. O'Toole is in the room. Call on
I was
him.
just ready to put a public comment. Go ahead. Who's up? Mr. O'Toole.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Donald O'Toole. I'm a veterinarian and I've lived in Laramie, worked in Laramie for the last 30 years. So I'm going to try and keep this brief. First of all, I want to thank the Office of State Lands and Investments through the chairman for helping to facilitate the lease agreement. I think this is one of the biggest things, at least for outdoor enthusiasts, that I've seen here in 30 years. I think it's a big deal. And Mr. Crowther has summarized the advantages in terms of habitat, economic benefits, educational benefits. I work at the University of Wyoming. And my second is to ask a question. And let me preface the question with some comments. I walk in this land every weekend, generally both days of the weekend. And this is the public land that's already available. It's very heavily used by walkers and runners and cyclists, skiers in winter, and there are some riders who use this land. I've never seen a trap there. And the people who walk on the current publicly available parcel generally walk their dogs off leash. And there's a comment this morning that when you're walking on Forest Service land, you have to walk your dog on a leash that is 6 foot long or less. I don't think that's correct. And the reason why I'm making that point is because most people who walk their dogs on this parcel do so off leash, unless the dog is vicious or likely to attack animals. I think the same rules apply on this land that apply to Forest Service land. In other words, they're under control, but they don't necessarily have to be on a leash. When the comment was made earlier on about the dog being on a leash, that is correct as far as it refers to Forest Service developed recreational areas and interpretive trails, but there may be some other exceptions to that. So here's my question through the chair. Does anybody on this call, Zoom call, know whether there has been a history of past trapping, whether there is a need for trapping, and whether it's likely trappers will want to use the Pilot Hill land. And that's in the context of the conversation we had this morning, and in the context of my best friend's dog getting trapped in the past in another area, on a wildlife habitat area, by the way. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's my testimony and that's my question. I appreciate your patience.
Okay, well, I can't answer that question, and our game and fish people that were on the call this morning are no longer here, but we do have Representative Haley, who may have some knowledge whether there's been trapping in that particular area in the past, if he's still on. Representative Haley, are you still there? We may have lost him, but myself knows of no trapping in that area. I don't know why there wouldn't be, and I don't know if anyone else on the committee has any knowledge of that particular area. I doubt it, 'cause we're all from other areas in the state. Mr. Representative Haley is the one that's from just us from me in Centennial, and was the game warden for the area, so he would have good knowledge, I would think. But is Senator Moniz there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am.
Okay. Could you comment on trapping in that particular area on this Pilot Hill project area?
Well, I don't have very much knowledge as to whether it won't be allowed or not, but I'm assuming that when the county commissioners negotiated with the state land office for the manage of that property, that would have been part of the agreement. So I guess, Jason, do you have knowledge of whether that's going to be allowed or not?
Well, just a quick comment there. I think that hunting is going to be allowed some of that, but Mr. Crowder, could you answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try anyway. I'm not sure of the history of trapping in the area. We were not made aware of any need to trap other than it was a historical sheep operation, and so perhaps there was a coyote trapping activity that went along with that, but we weren't made aware of that. On state trust lands across the state, trapping is allowed because it hasn't been disallowed. So there's not an explicit provision that would allow trapping, and we rely on game and fish guidance to tell us if trapping is hunting or if it's a recreational activity, and we have ongoing conversations with the Game and Fish Department about that. However, you are correct that we did work with the commissioners and expect them to manage hunting in the property pursuant to their land use plan. And so if trapping was allowed, wasn't allowed, the Board of Land Commissioners has allowed the Albany County Commissioners to make that call.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if Sarah may have some input into that.
Ms. Matthews, do you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Senator Moniz and Chairman Miller. Our intent at this point is to certainly not anticipate any need or reason for trapping within the recreation corridor portion of this management area, unless there was some unique circumstance where perhaps we had a bear or something that we needed to manage appropriately. Within the wildlife habitat management area, that was just approved by the Game and Fish Commission this month, September 24th or so, and we will take a full year in partnership with Wyoming Game and Fish to determine how we're going to, what restrictions we're going to have within that hunter management area for the WHMA portion of the property. I don't want to misspeak because these are conversations that we are just beginning to have with our experts in the field, but it certainly is not conducive to the type of recreational use that we anticipate having occur on this property across the board. I just say that though with the caveat that, you know, I own a small cabin up in the Snowy Range, and we were grateful to have the Game and Fish come in and trap a bear for us last summer. So I don't want to ever say never in this situation. We are putting on the hat of managing land carefully in a way that will make sure that we're being safe and really protecting the users in this, which we anticipate will be all ages of members of our community, and wanting them to feel safe on the property. Recreational trapping just, to me, does not make sense with our plan. But as I said, within the WHMA, it may be that we find a way that we would have a process for determining if an exception was needed for safety reasons. And
Okay.
Mr. O'Toole, I just encourage you to continue to partner with us. Mr. O'Toole has been a strong advocate for this project in Laramie, and I know that he'll stay in touch with us as we move through the process of working on this issue.
Okay, Senator Manise, you had a further comment?
I do, or a question for Jason again, or for Sarah. You brought up the point about, are there any grazing leases on any of this property or any other contracts that we're not aware of?
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that question for you, Senator Moniz. There's not any grazing leases. We're foregoing other revenue sources that we're accustomed to, and we are charging Albany County what we call a covenant fee to be able to do that at $2 an acre. So there's not any other leases but this special use lease on the property, and we're getting compensated for having only one.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for Mr. O'Toole? Representative Flitner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to tag on to Senator Monise's question to Mr. Crowder, if there were a need for fire mitigation, would you look at the possibility of grazing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flitner, absolutely. As you know, our office is charged with fire management across the whole state, particularly on state trust lands. And any tools that they have available that might work for fire mitigation, they do employ. We do employ grazing on a temporary basis on other properties across the state. And if that made sense here, we would work with the Albany County Commissioners and the Pilot Hill Group to see if it could be done to help that situation.
Okay, any further questions or comments, committee? For Mr. O'Toole. Okay, thanks, Mr. O'Toole, for coming to the meeting and testifying before us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, anyone else have a question for Mr. Crowder or Ms. Matthews before we close this subject? And Mary Beth, are there any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, there was no one else that signed up for public comment.
Okay, very good. Committee, any question, comment before we close it out? Okay, Mr. Crowder, Ms. Matthews, thank you for joining our meeting. I think that completes our day. John, do you have any thoughts before we adjourn here?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I saw, just a second, I saw Representative Haley there for a second. Representative Haley.
Yes, sir. I had unexpected traffic in my front yard. I had to leave the meeting for a moment.
Okay, we had a question on that the Pilot Hill project, whether there was any trapping that occurs on that east side of Laramie. Do you know of any with your past?
There is trapping all around Laramie, not as much as it used to be. Trapping, I wouldn't call it a dying art, but there's not as many people trapping as used to be by a long shot. But they can control the trapping up there easily, just like they used to do on Pole Mountain. They used to divide it in half, if I remember right, and you applied the trap there. And so one trapper would get the south half of Pole Mountain, and another trapper would get the north half. And I'm not sure what they do now with it.
Did you happen to take a look at that Pilot Hill project map, that blue area? east of Laramie?
I'm familiar with that. I was on their committee.
You were, okay. So was any trapping occurring there in the recent past?
I can't answer that. I'd have to talk to Doug Samuelson, the previous landowner.
Okay, very good. Well, I think they have the ability to not trap it if they choose, from my understanding.
They can control the trapping.
Yeah.
And they can control the public participation in there and restrict it to dog walking one day and trapping the next, or whatever they wanted it to do. Anyway, they've got the flexibility built in to state lands and the Game and Fish and Pilot Hill, and they can pretty well control everything that they want to control.
Very good. All right, committee, any other thoughts on this subject? Okay, seeing none. John, did you have any food for the closing? Any thoughts for the before we close the meeting?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, we call to order at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Again, same time, same place. So the meeting's adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Representative Winter has his hand up.
Which one?
Representative Winter.
Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a statement here in a possible motion. It's come to my attention that this COVID-19 situation for the state has really gotten publicized and politicized to the point that we need to, I think the legislature needs to do what we can to convince the governor to remove these restrictions that has been imposed on the citizens of Wyoming. And so I wanted to make a motion to that effect and see what this particular committee thought of that. And then if we get an affirmative response, then I would suggest that we send that to our governor.
I'll second it.
Okay, let's check with John and see whether that committee, can we send a letter to the governor, or do we need to go through management council to be able to do that?
Mr. Chairman, there's nothing precluding this committee from sending a letter to the governor to express its feelings on a particular issue. The only, I guess, procedural or process-wise concern I would have is that it doesn't really fall squarely with any of the interim topics that have been assigned to the committee. So that would be the only concern I would have.
Okay, my preference would be to send it to management council with a copy to the governor. Representative Winter, I don't know if you can accept that as a possible amendment if we go forward with this.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Whatever we do, I think we need to make our wishes known to the governor, whether it's a copy or whatever. But I think every committee ought to be thinking about this. And I know the constituents that I'm involved with, and I see all around the state, we're really getting tired of these restrictions that seem to have no scientific basis. And especially this masking restriction on our children going to school. So whatever it takes, I would hope that we could send something to the governor expressing our concerns and maybe get his attention a little bit. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wasserberger. Is that who said, Mr.
Chairman? I was not asking to speak.
Okay.
That was me, Mr. Chairman. Richard Task. Representative Task.
Go ahead, Representative Task.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with John. I don't see a problem with sending a copy to the Management Council, but we definitely need to communicate our feelings with the governor. So I agree with Representative Winter. Thank you.
Okay, so we've had a motion and a second.
Sure.
And Representative, you repeat the motion. Let's go to Senator Dalton first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whether pro or con, our agenda, I just don't know that it's an appropriate thing to do in a committee. It'd be one thing if we'd had it on our committee to say we would discuss it and have public input, but it wasn't even on our agenda. So I just have some concerns. I think if each individual legislature wants to send their own letter to the governor, we should do so. We should act how we feel and give them our view, but I don't think that it's appropriate when it's not on the agenda. Thank you.
Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we need to bypass Management Council since Management Council seems to be pushing the governor's agenda. So yeah, we need to completely bypass Management Council. Thank you.
I don't agree with Senator Dalton's comments that it's out of this committee's purview, really, but the COVID-19, frankly, was out of everyone's purview before it hit us after the last legislative session. So, if the committee wants to send a letter, I'm okay with that if we get enough votes for it. If it doesn't pass, then I would highly recommend that maybe Representative Winter could draft a letter and pass it around to the certain members of the committee that would want us on. Okay, so do we have a further comment on this topic? So Representative Winter, can you repeat what the letter's going to say again?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the TRW Interim Committee consider the need to eliminate all COVID-19 restrictions on the citizens of the state of Wyoming and send the results of an affirmative vote to our governor.
Okay, and that's was seconded by Representative Edwards. Okay, further discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Flitner.
Thank you. And I just have a question. I guess I don't understand why individual letters from legislators wouldn't have the same sort of impact as a committee letter might have. Honestly, this wasn't on our schedule, and I don't know why as a committee we would feel the need to send a letter as a committee. I mean, I don't disagree with what Representative Winter is suggesting. I just don't know that it needs to be a committee letter.
Okay, further comment? Further discussion? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to Representative Flitner, there have been several letters sent to the governor since this COVID-19 situation arrived. And I wrote one back there right before Easter time, expressing the same concern. And I know there's been other letters sent as well to no avail. So I think would be appropriate for several people to sign on together, and maybe that would get his attention. I'm not sure, but that's my feeling.
Okay, further comments, committee. Representative Edwards.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've also sent letters to the governor and have heard nothing back from him, period.
Okay, Senator Walberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak against this motion simply because as we work through the interim, the things that we're supposed to do are supposed to be decided by this committee and by also Management Council. Management Council directs the interim work for the legislature, and this wasn't a topic for us. But I will tell you that being involved in schools and being in and out of schools, one of the things that happened last spring was that we saw activities canceled across this state. And so students didn't get to complete their basketball season. They didn't get to participate in soccer. They didn't get to play track and field. All of those sports were done. And the kids didn't get to go to school. They were quarantined at home. And now when you go to a high school, all the students are wearing masks, all of them. And there's one reason, because they don't want this to stop them from getting to go to school, getting to play sports, getting to do music, getting to do art. And we are sending a very wrong message by doing this as a committee. If you choose to do it by yourself and write your own letter, that is up to you. And you can send an email to the governor, you can call him, but I do not think it's under the parameters of this committee to do what we're asking it to do. So I am a strong no.
Okay, committee, further comments? Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Manise.
Yeah, thank you. I personally don't think it would hurt to send a letter. I don't know about you, but I've been to every baseball game and rodeo and volleyball game and football game you can go to in the state in the last 6 months. I've seen very few masks. People are doing just fine. All it takes is a little common sense, and if everybody uses a little common sense, I think we'd get along just fine. I agree with Representative Winters. It's time to send our message again. I don't know if it's going to do any good, but I don't think it's going to hurt. I'm right on board with him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Manise. Further discussion? Further discussion?
Senator James has his hand up.
Okay, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to make sure that this letter has in there how these orders violate people's Article 1, Section 38 constitutional rights. By these orders, it's violating those, and we got to make sure that people's rights are not being violated. So we got to make sure that we have this in that letter. Thank you.
Is that an amendment?
It's not necessarily an amendment. I just want to make sure it's just in that letter.
It's not going to be in the letter's point. It's going to, what Representative Winters' comments were is what would be in the letter at this point.
Correct.
But you're welcome to make an amendment to add.
Okay, and then yeah, I'd like to make an amendment that we have that Article 1, Section 38 added to that letter.
Do I have a second?
Article 1, Section 38 is stating in there that people shall have the right to make his or her own healthcare decisions, as well as the parent or guardian of their children also have the right to make their healthcare decisions over their kids. And it's also stating that the state of Wyoming shall act to preserve these rights from undue government infringement. So that's what Article 1, Section 38 of the Wyoming Constitution states. So it's very important that we have that in this letter to remind the governor that by instituting these orders or allowing an unelected person to institute these orders, he's infringing upon people's constitutional rights. So it's very important that we put that in this letter. Thank you.
So do we have a second to the amendment?
Representative Winters already seconded
it.
My apologies, I didn't see his hand, sorry.
Okay, Representative Winters, you seconded that amendment?
Yes, I do.
I didn't hear you again. Did you second it?
I did. Thank you.
Oh, very good. So we're amendment Article 38 to the letter. Further discussion? Further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand.
Chairman?
Chairman, Representative Freeman had his hand up.
Yeah.
Okay, Representative Freeman.
I can read the room, and this is probably a useless argument, but if you go down to section 38D or C, the legislature may determine reasonable and necessary restrictions of the rights granted under this section to protect the health and general welfare of the people or to accomplish other purpose set forth in the Wyoming Constitution. I think we have to have a balanced approach, and I've watched the governor try to do that balanced approach. I'm against this amendment. It says that the legislature may determine that, but it's my understanding that we've kind of given the governor the ability to act on our behalf when we're not in session. So I assume that's what the governor is using to cover. I'm a former educator too, and I know the kids want to go back to school. I've gotten the letters that you've gotten that says kids don't transport it to other kids. The problem is there's teachers in that room, and there are people with impaired health that are in those rooms also. So I find the mask very uncomfortable, but I'm also the poster child of why people are trying to create a safe environment. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I just would like the committee to know that I strongly oppose this amendment and this both the amendments.
Okay, further discussion? Representative Flitner?
No.
Okay, further discussion on the amendment? Okay, John, did you have any comment?
Mr. Chairman, I guess I just did want to reiterate that whether or not the governor is acting in an unconstitutional way is, I'd say, far from clear. And certainly the legislature has provided him the authority through the state health officer to deal with communicable diseases and deal with issues of quarantine and regulations when it comes to public health and safety. So I just wanted to raise that point with the committee. Thank you.
Okay, further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment to the proposed letter, raise your hand. And Mary Beth, can you take account?
Mr. Chairman, I count 5 members.
I missed that. What was the count, Mary Beth?
Mr. Chairman, I count 5 members, and I believe all members are present.
Okay. Okay, very good. So that amendment didn't pass, so we're back on the original motion. Further discussion on the
Mr.
original
Chairman,
motion.
point of order.
Okay, go ahead.
You have to go ahead and take a negative vote. You have to ask everybody to, those opposed, please raise their hand.
Okay. Those opposed, please raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, I count 5 members. 9, 10, wait, but
So the vote was 5-5 with what, 3 or 4 abstaining?
I counted 6, Mary Beth, without Ogden. No vote.
Mr. Chairman, there was a couple of delayed hand raises. If we could just do that over again, my apologies.
Okay, all those opposed, raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, I counted 8 members.
Okay, that amendment did not pass. We're back on the original motion. Further discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Representative Newsom's hand is still up. It's from the previous action. Representative Tass, do you have some comment?
I call for the question.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, I count 5 members.
Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, I count 8 members.
Okay, motion has failed. Representative Winter, that does review from still sending a letter, and I'm sure there's a number of members that would like to co-sign it with you. If you want to get something out there and pass it around, and we'll see who signs on.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That will be done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, John, do we have anything else for the committee before we adjourn?
Not from LSO's perspective, thank you.
Okay, Senator Driscoll, are you there by chance? I think he's got a couple of other booked meetings this afternoon. So any other comments by anyone on the committee before we adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, our start time is 8:30 tomorrow. Is that correct?
That's what I have on my schedule. Mary Beth, is that still current?
Mr. Chairman, it is.
Okay, very good. Okay, see everyone at 8:30 in the morning. Thank you.